The notification chime from my secure military email cut through the silence of my home office like a blade. I looked up from the quarterly reports I was reviewing for Sentinel Security Solutions, the cybersecurity consulting firm I'd built from scratch after leaving the Army. The sender's name made my blood run cold. Colonel Patricia Hayes, my former commanding officer from the 82nd Airborne Division's Intelligence Unit. Why would she be contacting me through official channels on a Thursday evening? Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. What I was about to discover would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my closest friendship, and the life I'd carefully constructed after 8 years of military service. My husband Marcus and my best friend since basic training, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, had been secretly conspiring for months to destroy me financially and legally. They'd crafted an elaborate scheme to frame me for defense contract fraud, believing they could steal my company and leave me facing federal prison time. But there was one crucial detail they didn't know about their perfect plan. 3 weeks earlier, I'd hired attorney Rebecca Morrison to handle my company's legal compliance issues. Rebecca Morrison, who happened to be married to the very lawyer Marcus and Sarah had secretly retained to orchestrate my downfall. The email was brief but urgent. Captain Rodriguez, need to speak with you immediately regarding irregularities in defense contracts associated with your current business operations. This matter requires immediate attention and cannot be discussed over unsecured channels. Please call my direct line within the next hour. This is time-sensitive. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone. Captain Rodriguez. She was using my former rank, which meant this was serious military business, not a casual check-in from an old mentor. During my years in Army intelligence, I'd learned to read between the lines of official communications, and everything about this message screamed crisis. I was Victoria Elena Rodriguez, 34 years old, born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, to a family that had served this country for 3 generations. My grandfather fought in Korea, my father served 2 tours in Vietnam, and my brother was currently deployed with the Marines in the Pacific. Military service wasn't just my career choice. It was woven into the DNA of who I was as a person. After graduating from the University of Texas with degrees in computer science and international relations, I'd commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army's Military Intelligence Corps. 8 years later, I'd earned the rank of captain and developed expertise in cybersecurity, digital forensics, and counterintelligence operations. My service record included deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, where I'd helped protect sensitive communications networks from enemy cyber attacks. When I decided to transition to civilian life 2 years ago, it wasn't because I'd fallen out of love with serving my country. It was because I'd recognized an opportunity to serve in a different capacity. The private sector was desperately in need of cybersecurity professionals who understood both military-grade security protocols and the unique threats facing defense contractors. I could make a bigger impact by protecting the companies that supported our military operations than I could by remaining in uniform. Sentinel Security Solutions had grown rapidly since I'd founded it. We specialized in helping defense contractors, government agencies, and military technology companies protect their digital assets from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. My military background gave me credibility with clients who needed to know their sensitive information was being protected by someone who understood the stakes involved. The company's success had exceeded my wildest expectations. Within 18 months, we'd secured contracts with major defense contractors, earned security clearances that allowed us to work on classified projects, and built a team of 12 highly skilled cybersecurity professionals. Our revenue for the previous year had topped $3 million, and projections for the current year suggested we'd double that figure. My personal life had seemed equally successful. I'd been married to Marcus Thompson for 3 years, together for 5. Marcus was a financial advisor who specialized in helping military families manage their investments and plan for retirement. We'd met at a veterans networking event in TIAB, Austin, where his charm and apparent understanding of military culture had immediately attracted me. He seemed to appreciate my drive and ambition, supporting my decision to start my own company and celebrating each milestone as we built our life together. Our home in Cedar Park, an affluent suburb north of Austin, reflected our combined success. The 4-bedroom house sat on 2 acres of Texas hill country, with a home office where I could work securely when I wasn't at the downtown Austin headquarters of Sentinel Security Solutions. We hosted barbecues for other veteran couples, took weekend trips to the Gulf Coast, and talked about starting a family once my business was more established. Sarah Chen had been my roommate at the Defense Language Institute during our early Army careers, and we'd maintained our friendship through multiple deployments and duty assignments. She'd chosen to make the Army her long-term career, rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel and specializing in military logistics and procurement. Currently stationed at Fort Hood, about an hour north of Austin, Sarah visited frequently and had become like a sister to both Marcus and me. The 3 of us had developed what I thought was a genuine friendship. Sarah often stayed in our guest room when she had business in Austin, and she'd become Marcus's sounding board for investment advice tailored to military families. They seemed to share an easy camaraderie that I appreciated, since it meant my husband and best friend got along well. I never imagined that their relationship had evolved into something darker and more calculating. 3 weeks before Colonel Hayes's ominous email, I'd made a decision that would prove to be the most fortunate choice of my professional life. Sentinel Security Solutions had grown large enough that we needed dedicated legal counsel to handle contract negotiations, compliance issues, and the complex regulations governing defense contractors. After interviewing several law firms, I'd hired Rebecca Morrison from Morrison & Associates, a boutique firm that specialized in military and government contracting law. Rebecca was sharp, experienced, and came highly recommended by other defense contractors who'd worked with her firm. During our initial consultation, she'd impressed me with her thorough understanding of the regulatory environment and her practical approach to helping companies navigate complex compliance requirements. She'd also mentioned that her husband was a partner at a larger firm that handled more general corporate legal matters, though we hadn't discussed his work in any detail. The timing of hiring Rebecca had been driven by pure business necessity. Sentinel Security Solutions was bidding on several large contracts that would require enhanced legal oversight, and I wanted to ensure we had proper representation before moving forward. The decision had nothing to do with any suspicions about Marcus or Sarah, because at that point, I had no reason to suspect either of them of anything beyond complete loyalty and support. I dialed Colonel Hayes's direct number, my military training, helping me maintain composure despite the anxiety building in my chest. She answered on the first ring, her voice carrying the crisp authority I remembered from our years working together. "Victoria, thank you for calling so quickly. I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, and I need you to understand that this conversation is being recorded for official purposes." The formal tone sent ice through my veins. Colonel Hayes and I had worked closely together on several classified projects during my final years in the Army. She'd been a mentor who'd encouraged my transition to the private sector and had even provided references when I was building my client base. For her to be speaking to me with this level of formality meant something had gone seriously wrong. "I'm listening, ma'am." "We've received allegations that Sentinel Security Solutions has been involved in fraudulent billing practices related to your defense contracts. Specifically, allegations that you've been inflating costs, charging for work not performed, and potentially compromising classified information for financial gain." The words hit me like physical blows. Fraudulent billing practices, compromising classified information. These weren't minor compliance violations. These were federal crimes that could result in decades in prison and the complete destruction of everything I'd worked to build. "Ma'am, I can assure you that Sentinel Security Solutions operates with complete integrity. We maintain meticulous records of all work performed, and we've never billed for services not rendered. As for classified information, our security protocols exceed industry standards, and we've never had any security incidents. I believe you, Victoria, which is why I'm calling you directly instead of allowing this to proceed through normal channels. But the allegations are specific and detailed. Someone with intimate knowledge of your business operations has provided documentation that appears to support claims of systematic fraud. Someone with intimate knowledge of my business operations. The phrase echoed in my mind as I tried to process what Colonel Hayes was telling me. Very few people had access to the level of detail that would be required to fabricate convincing evidence of fraud. My employees were all cleared personnel with strong backgrounds and no apparent motive for sabotage. My accountant was a respected professional who'd handled my books since I'd started the company. That left family and close friends who'd had access to my home office, my computer systems, and my business discussions. Marcus had certainly heard countless conversations about my contracts and clients. Sarah, with her procurement background, understood defense contracting better than most people and had often offered advice about navigating military bureaucracy. Ma'am, can you tell me who made these allegations? The complaint was filed by someone claiming to have inside knowledge of your operations. The paperwork was submitted through an attorney representing what they called a concerned party with knowledge of ongoing criminal activity. Victoria, I have to ask you directly. Is there anyone in your personal or professional circle who might have reason to harm you financially or professionally? The question hung in the air as my mind raced through possibilities. I thought about disgruntled employees, but we'd never had to terminate anyone, and all my staff seemed genuinely committed to our mission. I considered competitors who might want to damage my reputation, but the cybersecurity industry was large, enough that direct sabotage seemed unlikely. Then I thought about my personal relationships, and a cold realization began forming in the back of my mind. Marcus had been acting strangely for the past few months. He'd become secretive about his phone calls, claiming they were related to confidential client matters. He'd shown unusual interest in my work schedule and had asked pointed questions about which contracts were most profitable. I'd attributed his behavior to stress from his own business challenges, but now I wondered if there might be more sinister explanations. Sarah had also been behaving differently during her recent visits. She'd spent considerable time in my home office, claiming she was researching procurement regulations for her own work at Fort Hood. She'd asked detailed questions about my security protocols and had seemed particularly interested in how I managed classified materials. Again, I'd assumed her interest was professional curiosity, but the timing now seemed suspicious. Ma'am, I need to review some things before I can answer that question completely. But I want to assure you that I will cooperate fully with any investigation, and I'm confident that a thorough review of our operations will vindicate both me and my company. I hope you're right, Victoria. In the meantime, I'm required to inform you that a formal investigation is being initiated. You should expect contact from federal investigators within the next few days. I strongly recommend that you retain legal counsel immediately. Legal counsel. The irony of the situation was beginning to dawn on me. If Marcus and Sarah were somehow involved in these allegations, they might assume I'd be scrambling to find an attorney who could help me navigate this crisis. They probably expected me to be panicked, vulnerable, and dependent on their advice about how to handle the legal challenges ahead. What they didn't know was that I'd already established a relationship with Rebecca Morrison, whose expertise in defense contracting law made her perfectly positioned to help me fight whatever fraudulent allegations had been manufactured against me. Even more importantly, they didn't know that Rebecca's insights into the legal community might help me understand who was orchestrating this attack and why. Thank you for the warning, ma'am. I'll be ready for the investigators, and I'll make sure I have proper representation. After ending the call with Colonel Hayes, I sat in my home office staring at the awards and commendations that lined my walls. The Army Commendation Medal I'd earned for excellence in counterintelligence operations. the certificate recognizing my contributions to cybersecurity during my deployment to Afghanistan, the framed photo of my team celebrating a successful mission to protect critical communication networks from enemy hackers. Everything I'd accomplished in my military career had been built on principles of integrity, loyalty, and service to others. The idea that someone would try to destroy my reputation by falsely accusing me of the very crimes I'd spent my career fighting against felt like a personal violation that went beyond mere financial or professional harm. But I was a trained intelligence officer who'd spent years identifying threats, analyzing enemy tactics, and developing countermeasures to protect American interests. If someone was targeting me with false allegations, I would use every skill I'd learned in the Army to identify them, understand their motives, and neutralize their ability to cause further harm. The investigation they'd launched against me would ultimately become an investigation into them. And thanks to Rebecca Morrison, I had legal expertise on my side that they didn't know about and couldn't plan around. The war they'd started was about to become the biggest mistake of their lives. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror at 6:30 the next morning, trying to convince myself that Colonel Hayes's phone call had been some kind of administrative error or misunderstanding. Maybe there was another Victoria Rodriguez running a defense contracting business somewhere in Texas. Maybe the allegations were targeting a different company with a similar name. Maybe this was all just a bureaucratic mix-up that would be resolved, with a few phone calls and some paperwork clarification. The face looking back at me showed the strain of a sleepless night. Dark circles shadowed my brown eyes, and my usually pristine appearance looked rumpled despite my best efforts to maintain my normal morning routine. I'd always prided myself on maintaining military bearing even in civilian life, but the weight of the accusations was already taking its toll. Marcus was still asleep when I left for the office, which was unusual since he typically got up before me to hit the gym before his first client meetings. He'd come home late the previous evening, claiming he'd been working with a new client on a complex investment portfolio. When I'd tried to tell him about Colonel Hayes's call, he'd seemed distracted and dismissive, suggesting that military bureaucracy often created problems where none existed. These things usually blow over once someone actually looks at the facts, he'd said while scrolling through his phone. You run a clean operation, Vic. Don't let some desk jockey at the Pentagon stress you out over paperwork nonsense. His casual attitude had been somewhat reassuring at the time, but now it felt oddly disconnected from the seriousness of what I was facing. Marcus understood enough about government contracting to know that fraud allegations weren't paperwork nonsense. They were career-ending, life-destroying accusations that required immediate and serious attention. The drive to my office in downtown Austin gave me time to think through the possibilities. Sentinel Security Solutions occupied the top 2 floors of a modern building near the Capitol, with views of the hill country that usually reminded me why I'd chosen to build my life in Texas. This morning, the familiar landscape looked somehow foreign and unwelcoming. I'd spent considerable time during the sleepless night reviewing my business practices in my mind, searching for any possible irregularities that might have triggered an investigation. Every contract we'd ever signed, every invoice we'd ever submitted, every security protocol we'd ever implemented. I couldn't identify a single instance where we'd operated outside the bounds of ethical business practices. Sentinel Security Solutions employed 12 people, all of whom had been carefully vetted through background investigations that exceeded government requirements. My chief technology officer, David Park, was a former Navy cryptologic technician who'd left active duty after 10 years of service. My lead analyst, Jennifer Walsh, had transitioned from the Air Force's Information Warfare Directorate. Every member of my team understood the importance of integrity in our work because they'd sworn the same oaths I had when we served in uniform. Our largest contracts were with Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Dynamics, providing cybersecurity assessments and digital forensic support for various defense programs. Every project followed established protocols, and every deliverable was thoroughly documented and reviewed before submission. Our billing practices were conservative to the point of leaving money on the table rather than risking any appearance of impropriety. I unlocked my office and immediately went to the secure filing cabinet where I kept copies of all our contract documentation. If federal investigators were planning to review our operations, I wanted to have everything organized and readily accessible. My military training had taught me that preparation and attention to detail were the best defenses against bureaucratic challenges. As I pulled files and began organizing them chronologically, I tried to imagine what specific allegations might have been made against us. The most common types of defense contractor fraud involved inflating costs, billing for work not performed, substituting inferior materials or services, or providing kickbacks to government employees. None of these scenarios applied to our operations, which made the accusations even more puzzling. My phone rang at 8:15, interrupting my file review. The caller ID showed Sarah Chen's number, which immediately made me feel more optimistic. Sarah's expertise in military procurement meant she would understand the regulatory environment better than anyone else I could talk to. If there was a way to resolve this situation quickly, she would know how to navigate the process. "Vic, I just heard about your situation through some contacts at Fort Hood. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this bureaucratic nightmare." Sarah's voice carried what sounded like genuine concern and sympathy. "I'm still trying to figure out what triggered the investigation," I replied, grateful to have someone who understood the military system to talk through the situation. "I've been going through our files all morning, and I can't find anything that would justify fraud allegations." "That's because you run an ethical operation, which makes this whole thing even more frustrating. Unfortunately, the military bureaucracy doesn't always operate on logic or facts. Sometimes these investigations get started based on incomplete information or personal grudges." Sarah's explanation made sense and aligned with my own understanding of how military bureaucracy could sometimes create problems for innocent people. During my years in uniform, I'd seen good soldiers face unfair treatment because someone had misunderstood their actions or misinterpreted their motives. "Do you have any advice about how to handle the investigation process?" I asked. "The most important thing is to get legal representation immediately. You don't want to try to navigate this on your own, especially if federal investigators are involved. Do you have an attorney who specializes in government contracting?" "Actually, I hired a lawyer a few weeks ago to handle our compliance issues. Rebecca Morrison from Morrison and Associates. She seems to know the regulatory environment pretty well." There was a brief pause before Sarah responded, and when she did, her tone sounded slightly different. "Rebecca Morrison? I'm not familiar with that firm. Are you sure she has experience with criminal defense matters? This situation might require someone with more specialized expertise." Sarah's suggestion made me second-guess my choice of legal representation. Rebecca Morrison had impressed me during our initial consultation, but her practice focused primarily on corporate compliance and contract negotiations. If I was facing potential criminal charges, maybe I needed an attorney with more experience in federal criminal defense. "Maybe you're right. Do you know anyone who specializes in this type of case?" "Actually, I do. There's a firm in Austin that handles a lot of military-related legal issues. The senior partner is supposed to be excellent at dealing with defense contractor investigations. Let me get you his contact information." Sarah's offer to help felt like a lifeline during what was rapidly becoming the most stressful situation of my professional life. Having a friend who understood both military, culture, and legal processes was exactly what I needed to navigate this crisis effectively. That would be incredibly helpful. I really appreciate you looking out for me. Of course. We've been through too much together for me to let you face this alone. I'll text you the attorney's information, and I'll also see what I can find out through my contacts about where these allegations came from. After ending the call with Sarah, I felt significantly more optimistic about my situation. Having experienced legal counsel and a well-connected friend helping me investigate the source of the allegations would give me the best possible chance of resolving this matter quickly and with minimal damage to my business. My assistant, Maria Santos, arrived at 9 o'clock and immediately noticed my distressed state. Maria had been with Sentinel Security Solutions since our second month of operations, and she'd become both a trusted employee and a personal friend. Her organizational skills and attention to detail had been instrumental in helping me build the company's administrative infrastructure. "Victoria, you look like you haven't slept. Is everything okay?" I'd planned to keep the investigation confidential until I better understood the scope and seriousness of the allegations, but Maria's genuine concern made me reconsider. She would need to know what was happening if federal investigators showed up at our office asking questions. "We're facing some regulatory challenges that might result in government scrutiny of our operations. I don't think it's anything serious, but I wanted to give you a heads up in case investigators contact the office." Maria's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "What kind of regulatory challenges? Did we miss some compliance requirement?" "I don't think we did anything wrong, but apparently someone has made allegations about our billing practices. I'm working with legal counsel to get everything sorted out." "Do you need me to pull together any specific documentation? I can have our complete contract files organized within a couple of hours if that would help." Maria's immediate offer to help reinforced my confidence in the loyalty and integrity of my team. Everyone at Sentinel Security Solutions understood that our reputation depended on maintaining the highest ethical standards, and they took that responsibility seriously. That would be extremely helpful. Let's focus on our 3 largest contracts first, since those would be the most likely targets for scrutiny. I spent the rest of the morning working with Maria to organize our documentation while trying to maintain normal operations for the rest of my staff. Several clients called with routine questions about ongoing projects, and I forced myself to focus on their needs rather than my growing anxiety about the investigation. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah containing contact information for the attorney she'd recommended. The firm was called Thompson & Associates, and the senior partner was named James Thompson. The name seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place where I might have heard it before. I called Thompson & Associates and spoke with a receptionist who scheduled an emergency consultation for later that afternoon. James Thompson had apparently handled numerous cases involving defense contractor investigations, and his secretary assured me that he would be able to provide expert guidance about navigating federal scrutiny. The prospect of meeting with an experienced criminal defense attorney made the situation feel more real and more serious than I'd initially wanted to acknowledge. Until that moment, I'd been hoping that this was all some kind of administrative misunderstanding that could be resolved with paperwork and explanations. The need for criminal defense counsel suggested that I was facing something much more significant and potentially life-changing. Marcus called around 2 o'clock to check on how I was handling the stress of the investigation. His concern felt genuine, and he offered to cancel his afternoon appointments to come to the office and provide moral support. "You don't need to do that," I told him. "I've got legal counsel lined up, and Sarah is helping me figure out where these allegations came from. I think we'll be able to get this resolved pretty quickly." "Sarah's helping you? That's great. She understands military bureaucracy better than anyone. If she thinks this is just administrative nonsense, then you probably don't have anything to worry about." Marcus's confidence in Sarah's assessment was reassuring, but I was beginning to realize that my initial optimism might have been naive. Federal fraud investigations weren't launched lightly, and the specificity of the allegations suggested that someone had invested considerable time and effort in building a case against me. The afternoon consultation with James Thompson would hopefully provide clarity about the seriousness of my situation and the best strategies for protecting myself and my company. Until then, I could only continue organizing documentation and hope that my clean business practices would speak for themselves when investigators reviewed our operations. I had no idea that by the end of the day, I would begin to understand just how carefully orchestrated this attack on my reputation had been, or how close to home the betrayal actually reached. The offices of Thompson & Associates occupied an entire floor of a glass tower in downtown Austin's legal district. As I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this meeting felt orchestrated in a way I couldn't quite identify. The receptionist had been unusually accommodating about scheduling an emergency consultation, and James Thompson's availability on such short notice seemed almost too convenient. The waiting area was decorated with expensive artwork and leather furniture that suggested a highly successful practice. Law degrees and bar admissions from multiple states lined the walls, along with photographs of James Thompson shaking hands with various political figures and military officials. Everything about the office projected competence and success, which should have been reassuring given the gravity of my situation. James Thompson emerged from his office at exactly 3 o'clock, and I immediately recognized him as someone I'd seen before, though I couldn't place where. He was tall and distinguished-looking, probably in his early 50s, with graying hair and the kind of confident bearing that comes from years of courtroom success. His handshake was firm, and his expression conveyed appropriate seriousness about my circumstances. Ms. Rodriguez, I understand you're facing some challenging allegations regarding your defense contracting business. Sarah Chen gave me a brief overview of your situation, but I'd like to hear the details directly from you. The mention of Sarah's name triggered a moment of confusion. During our phone conversation earlier, Sarah had offered to get me James Thompson's contact information, but she'd made it sound like she was going to research options and get back to me. She hadn't mentioned that she'd already spoken with him directly about my case. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me on such short notice, I replied, settling into a chair across from his imposing desk. I have to admit, I'm still trying to understand exactly what I'm being accused of. James Thompson opened a legal pad and picked up an expensive-looking pen. Why don't you start from the beginning? Tell me about your business, your contracts, and any interactions you've had with government officials that might have triggered this investigation. I spent the next 20 minutes providing a comprehensive overview of Sentinel Security Solutions, our client relationships, and our business practices. James Thompson listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his familiarity with defense contracting regulations. His questions were sharp and focused, suggesting he understood the industry better than I would have expected from our brief introduction. Based on what you're telling me, your business operations sound completely legitimate, he said after I finished my summary, which makes these allegations even more concerning. In my experience, when fraud accusations are made against clearly ethical operations, it usually means someone with inside knowledge is deliberately manufacturing evidence. The phrase inside knowledge sent a chill down my spine. I'd been trying not to think about the possibility that someone close to me might be involved in this situation, but James Thompson's assessment forced me to confront that uncomfortable reality. Who would have access to the kind of detailed information that would be needed to fabricate convincing fraud allegations? I asked. Employees with access to financial records, family members who might have seen confidential documents, business partners, or close friends who understand your operations, well enough to know what kind of allegations would be most damaging. Each category he mentioned felt like a punch to my stomach. My employees were all military veterans with security clearances who'd been thoroughly vetted. My family lived in San Antonio and had minimal involvement in my business affairs. That left Marcus and Sarah as the people with the most comprehensive knowledge of my company's operations and contract relationships. Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you something directly. Have you had any previous contact with my husband, Marcus Thompson, or my friend Sarah Chen before today? James Thompson's expression remained neutral, but I detected a slight hesitation before he responded. Sarah Chen contacted me this morning to ask about my availability for an emergency consultation. She explained that a friend was facing defense contractor fraud allegations and needed immediate legal representation. That was the extent of our previous contact. Something about his answer felt incomplete, though I couldn't identify exactly what was bothering me. The timing seemed too convenient, and Sarah's decision to contact him directly rather than simply providing me with his contact information struck me as unusual. Did Sarah provide you with any specific details about the allegations or the investigation? She mentioned that federal investigators were likely to contact you soon, and that the allegations involved billing irregularities and possible security violations. She seemed quite knowledgeable about military procurement processes. The conversation was raising more questions than it was answering. Sarah's knowledge of military procurement was extensive, but her familiarity with the specific details of my investigation suggested she had access to information I hadn't shared with her. During our phone conversation that morning, I'd been vague about the nature of the allegations, yet she seemed to understand the situation with remarkable precision. Mr. Thompson, I should mention that I've already retained legal counsel for my company's compliance matters. Rebecca Morrison from Morrison & Associates has been handling our regulatory issues for the past few weeks. The change in James Thompson's expression was subtle but unmistakable. His professional demeanor remained intact, but something shifted in his eyes when I mentioned Rebecca's name. The reaction was brief enough that I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching him carefully. Rebecca Morrison, he repeated slowly. I'm familiar with her work. She's quite competent in corporate compliance matters. However, criminal defense requires a different skill set than regulatory compliance. You'll need someone with specific experience in federal fraud investigations. Are you saying Rebecca isn't qualified to handle this situation? I'm saying that your current legal needs may exceed her area of expertise. Federal prosecutors take defense contractor fraud very seriously, and they have significant resources at their disposal. You need an attorney who understands how these investigations work and how to protect your interests throughout the process. James Thompson's assessment made sense from a professional standpoint, but something about his eagerness to replace Rebecca Morrison felt concerning. During my consultation with Rebecca, she demonstrated impressive knowledge of defense contracting, regulations, and had seemed confident about her ability to handle compliance challenges. What would be involved in retaining your services? I'd need to conduct a comprehensive review of your business operations, interview key personnel, and develop a defense strategy based on the specific allegations. My retainer for this type of case is typically $50,000, with additional fees based on the complexity and duration of the investigation. $50,000 was a substantial commitment, especially when I still wasn't certain about the seriousness of the allegations. The amount suggested that James Thompson expected this to be a prolonged and complex legal battle rather than a simple administrative misunderstanding. That's a significant investment. Do you really think this situation warrants that level of legal representation? Ms. Rodriguez, federal fraud investigations can result in decades in prison and complete forfeiture of business assets. If someone is trying to frame you for crimes you didn't commit, they're not playing games. They're trying to destroy your life, and you need to take that threat seriously. The stark reality of his words forced me to acknowledge what I'd been trying to avoid thinking about. Someone wasn't just trying to cause me professional embarrassment or temporary business difficulties. They were attempting to send me to federal prison and strip away everything I'd worked to build. I need some time to think about this decision, I said, standing to leave. Of course, but don't take too long. Once federal investigators start making inquiries, you'll want to have experienced counsel in place to protect your rights and guide your responses. As I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I couldn't shake the feeling that the meeting with James Thompson had raised more questions than it had answered. His knowledge of my situation seemed too detailed for someone who'd only learned about it that morning. His eagerness to have me fire Rebecca Morrison and hire him instead felt pushy in a way that didn't align with professional legal advice. Most troubling was the nagging sense that I'd seen him before, though I still couldn't place where or when. The feeling was strong enough to make me wonder if our meeting today hadn't been as accidental as Sarah had made it seem. During the drive back to my office, I found myself questioning assumptions I'd held since Colonel Hayes's phone call the previous evening. What if this wasn't a bureaucratic mix-up or a case of mistaken identity? What if someone really was trying to frame me for crimes I hadn't committed? And what if that someone was closer to me than I wanted to believe? The possibility that Marcus or Sarah might be involved in orchestrating these allegations felt like a betrayal so profound that I could barely allow myself to consider it. But my military intelligence training had taught me to follow evidence wherever it led, even when it pointed toward uncomfortable conclusions. By the time I reached my office, I'd made a decision that would prove to be crucial for everything that followed. Instead of immediately hiring James Thompson or dismissing Rebecca Morrison, I was going to conduct my own investigation into who was behind these allegations and why they were targeting me. I was about to discover that the truth was far more sinister than anything I'd imagined. I called Rebecca Morrison's office the moment I returned from my meeting with James Thompson. Her secretary informed me that Rebecca was in court, but could see me first thing the following morning. The urgency in my voice must have been apparent because she offered to have Rebecca call me that evening if the matter couldn't wait until our scheduled appointment. Please ask her to call me tonight. I've learned some things that change the nature of our legal situation significantly. While waiting for Rebecca's call, I decided to conduct some preliminary research into James Thompson's background and his connection to Sarah Chen. My military intelligence training had taught me that patterns of behavior and professional relationships often revealed important information about people's motivations and loyalties. A basic internet search revealed that Thompson & Associates was indeed a prominent criminal defense firm with an impressive track record in federal cases. James Thompson himself had been practicing law for 23 years and had represented numerous high-profile clients in white-collar criminal matters. His credentials were impeccable, which made his eager pursuit of my case even more puzzling. What I found more interesting was a series of legal articles he'd published about defense contractor fraud investigations. The articles demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of military procurement processes and investigative techniques used by federal agencies. One article, published 18 months earlier, specifically addressed strategies for defending against allegations of billing irregularities and security violations. The timing of that article struck me as significant. 18 months ago, Sentinel Security Solutions had been growing rapidly and beginning to attract attention within the defense contracting community. If someone had been planning to target my company with fraud allegations, they would have needed considerable time to develop a convincing case and coordinate their strategy. Rebecca Morrison called me at 7:30 that evening, her voice carrying the focused intensity I'd noticed during our initial consultation. "Victoria, my secretary said you had an urgent legal matter that couldn't wait until tomorrow. What's happened since we last spoke?" I provided her with a detailed summary of Colonel Hayes's call, my meeting with James Thompson, and my growing suspicions about Sarah Chen's involvement in the allegations against me. Rebecca listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her understanding of both the legal and personal dimensions of my situation. "Victoria, I need to tell you something that's going to sound like an incredible coincidence, but I assure you it's completely relevant to your situation," she said, after I finished my summary. "James Thompson is my husband." The words hit me like a physical blow. James Thompson was married to Rebecca Morrison. The attorney Sarah had recommended to replace Rebecca was actually Rebecca's husband. The implications of this connection were staggering and completely changed my understanding of what was happening. "Your husband? Rebecca, this can't be a coincidence." "It's absolutely not a coincidence. James came home last night talking about an interesting new case involving a defense contractor fraud investigation. He mentioned that Sarah Chen had contacted him about representing a friend who was facing federal allegations. When he described the basic facts of the case, I realized he was talking about you." My mind raced as I tried to process the implications of this revelation. Sarah had recommended that I hire James Thompson to replace Rebecca Morrison, apparently not knowing they were married. But if James had discussed my case with Rebecca, then Sarah's recommendation became even more suspicious. "Rebecca, did James tell Sarah that you were already representing me?" That's where this gets really concerning. James specifically asked Sarah not to mention his consultation with you to anyone else, claiming that attorney-client confidentiality required discretion. Sarah agreed to keep the consultation confidential, which means she deliberately kept you in the dark about the potential conflict of interest. The pattern of deception was becoming clearer. Sarah had maneuvered me toward hiring James Thompson while concealing the fact that he was married to my existing attorney. If I had hired James and fired Rebecca, the same law firm would have been representing me through both attorneys. But I wouldn't have known about the connection. What would be the advantage of having me represented by both of you without my knowledge? Complete control over your legal strategy and access to all information about your defense. If James was your criminal defense attorney and I was your corporate counsel, we'd have comprehensive knowledge of every aspect of your business and personal situation. Someone orchestrating fraud allegations against you would find that information extremely valuable. The sophisticated nature of the scheme was beginning to dawn on me. This wasn't a simple attempt to frame me for fraud. It was an elaborate plan to control my legal representation, monitor my defense strategy, and potentially sabotage my ability to fight the allegations effectively. Rebecca, I need to know if you think James is involved in this conspiracy. Honestly, I don't know. James seemed genuinely surprised when I told him I was already representing you. But his willingness to take your case without disclosing our marriage suggests he's either incompetent or complicit. Given his experience and reputation, incompetence seems unlikely. The possibility that both my best friend and my attorney's husband were working together to destroy me was almost too much to comprehend. These were people I should have been able to trust completely, yet they seemed to be coordinating efforts to control and manipulate my response to the crisis. What do you recommend I do? First, don't hire James under any circumstances. Second, we need to figure out exactly who filed these allegations and what evidence they claim to have. Third, we should consider the possibility that you're dealing with a conspiracy that involves multiple people working together. Rebecca's assessment aligned with my own growing suspicions. The coordination between Sarah's phone call and James Thompson's availability suggested advanced planning. The specific nature of the allegations suggested inside knowledge of my business operations. The attempt to control my legal representation suggested a sophisticated understanding of how defense strategies work. Can you help me investigate who's behind this? I can do better than that. I can recommend a private investigator who specializes in corporate fraud cases. Her name is Detective Linda Martinez, and she's excellent at identifying patterns of conspiracy and financial manipulation. Detective Linda Martinez. The name sounded familiar, though I couldn't immediately place where I'd heard it. Rebecca provided me with contact information and suggested that I meet with Detective Martinez as soon as possible. Victoria, there's one more thing you should know. Based on what you've told me about the timing and nature of these allegations, I think you're dealing with people who have been planning this attack for months, possibly longer. This isn't a spontaneous decision or an opportunistic attempt to cause you problems. This is a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to destroy your business and your reputation. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The gravity of Rebecca's assessment was sobering. Someone had invested significant time and energy in developing a plan to frame me for federal crimes. They understood my business well enough to craft convincing allegations. They had access to my personal relationships, and they were sophisticated enough to attempt manipulating my legal representation. Do you think they're trying to steal my company? That's certainly one possibility. Sentinel Security Solutions is valuable enough to be worth stealing, and federal fraud allegations would be an effective way to force you to sell quickly at a reduced price. But there could be other motives: personal revenge, professional jealousy, or even an attempt to eliminate competition in the cybersecurity market. As I ended the call with Rebecca, I realized that everything I'd believed about my personal and professional relationships was potentially compromised. Sarah Chen, my best friend and trusted confidant, was actively working to undermine my defense against fraud allegations. Marcus, my husband, had shown suspicious knowledge of my business operations and unusual interest in my work schedule. The people closest to me were the most likely suspects in a conspiracy designed to send me to federal prison and strip away everything I'd worked to build. The betrayal was so profound that I could barely process the emotional implications. But I was a trained intelligence officer who'd spent years identifying and neutralizing threats to American security. If someone was targeting me with sophisticated deception and manipulation, I would use every skill I'd learned to expose their conspiracy and protect myself. The investigation I was about to launch would reveal betrayals more shocking than anything I'd imagined. Detective Linda Martinez's office was located in a converted warehouse in East Austin, far from the polished corporate environments I'd been navigating over the past few days. The space felt more like a high-tech command center than a traditional private investigator's office, with multiple computer screens, sophisticated surveillance equipment, and walls covered with photographs and documents connected by colored strings like something from a crime drama. Linda herself was a compact woman in her 40s, with short silver hair and intense green eyes that seemed to process information faster than most people could speak. She'd served as a military police investigator before transitioning to civilian law enforcement, then eventually starting her own private investigation firm, specializing in corporate fraud and conspiracy cases. Ms. Rodriguez, Rebecca Morrison briefed me on the basic facts of your situation, but I want to hear everything directly from you. Start from the beginning and don't leave out any details, no matter how insignificant they might seem. I spent 45 minutes providing a comprehensive timeline of events, from Colonel Hayes's initial phone call through my meeting with James Thompson and the revelation about his marriage to Rebecca. Linda took detailed notes and occasionally asked clarifying questions that demonstrated her understanding of both military culture and corporate fraud investigation techniques. Based on what you're telling me, you're dealing with a sophisticated conspiracy that's been in development for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The coordination between the fraud allegations, your friend's recommendation of specific legal counsel, and the attempt to control your representation suggests multiple people working together with a detailed plan. Linda moved to one of her computer workstations and began pulling up various databases and search engines. Let's start by examining the financial motivations for targeting your company. Sentinel Security Solutions is worth approximately how much? Our annual revenue is projected to exceed $6 million this year, and we have contracts in place that could generate $15 to $20 million over the next 3 years. The company's fair market value is probably somewhere between $8 and $12 million. That's certainly worth stealing, Linda said while typing rapidly. Now let's look at who would benefit most from your downfall. If you were convicted of fraud and forced to sell the company quickly, who would be positioned to acquire it at a discount? The question forced me to think about potential competitors and business rivals who might have the motivation and resources to orchestrate such an elaborate scheme. The cybersecurity industry was competitive, but most of our competitors were large corporations that wouldn't need to resort to criminal conspiracy to gain market share. There are several larger firms that have tried to recruit me or acquire my company over the past 2 years, but I can't imagine any of them being involved in something like this. What about individuals who might want to start their own competing business using your client relationships and contracts? The question hit me like a lightning bolt. Marcus had intimate knowledge of my client relationships through conversations we'd had at home. Sarah understood military procurement processes well enough to compete for defense contracts. If they were working together, they would have the combined expertise needed to replicate my business model and steal my clients. Linda, I think my husband and my best friend might be planning to steal my company and use it as the foundation for their own business. That's a strong possibility. Let me run some background checks and financial analyses to see if we can find evidence of coordination between them. Linda's fingers flew across multiple keyboards as she accessed various databases and search engines. Within minutes, she was displaying information about Marcus's financial activities, Sarah's military assignments, and both of their recent communications patterns. Victoria, look at this. Your husband opened a new business bank account 3 weeks ago under the name Sentinel Security Consulting. The account was opened with a $50,000 deposit, which is interesting because his personal financial records show he didn't have that kind of cash available. The revelation that Marcus had started a competing business without telling me was devastating enough, but the timing made it even worse. 3 weeks ago was exactly when I'd hired Rebecca Morrison to handle Sentinel Security Solutions' legal compliance issues. Marcus had apparently been planning his betrayal for weeks while pretending to support me through what he knew would be a devastating crisis. Where did the $50,000 come from? That's where it gets really interesting. The deposit was made through a wire transfer from an account belonging to Sarah Chen. So your best friend provided the startup capital for your husband's competing business. The scope of their conspiracy was becoming clear. Sarah and Marcus had been planning to destroy my company and steal my clients for months. The fraud allegations were designed to force me into bankruptcy or federal prison, clearing the way for them to take over my business relationships and contracts. Linda, can you trace when they started planning this? Let me dig deeper into their communications and financial records. Linda opened several more applications and began cross-referencing data from multiple sources. Victoria, this is remarkable. I'm finding evidence of coordination between Marcus and Sarah going back almost 8 months. 8 months. That meant their conspiracy had begun shortly after Sentinel Security Solutions had signed its largest contracts with major defense contractors. They'd been planning my destruction since the moment my business became valuable enough to be worth stealing. What kind of evidence? Frequent phone calls between them when you were traveling for business, shared expenses for hotel rooms and restaurants, and most damning of all, consultation fees paid by Marcus to a law firm that specializes in defense contractor fraud investigations. The law firm consultation fees were the smoking gun that proved premeditation. Marcus and Sarah hadn't just decided to frame me for fraud. They'd hired legal experts to help them craft allegations that would be most likely to result in criminal prosecution. Which law firm did they consult? Harrison, Mitchell & Associates. They specialize in representing clients who report defense contractor fraud to federal agencies. According to their billing records, Marcus paid them $12,000 for consultations about procedures for reporting suspected fraud and the evidence requirements for successful prosecutions. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus and Sarah had spent months researching how to file convincing fraud allegations against defense contractors. They'd learned what evidence would be required and what procedures they needed to follow to trigger a federal investigation. Linda, do you think they forged documents to support their fraud allegations? Almost certainly. Let me show you something else I found. Linda pulled up a series of bank statements and financial records. Marcus has been accessing your business accounts using credentials that should only be available to you or your accountant. He's been downloading transaction records, contract documents, and client communications for months. The systematic theft of my business information explained how Marcus and Sarah had been able to craft specific and detailed fraud allegations. They had access to every financial transaction, every client communication, and every contract negotiation. They could have easily manipulated documents or taken information out of context to create the appearance of fraudulent activity. This is industrial espionage on top of conspiracy to commit fraud, Linda continued. Your husband has been systematically stealing proprietary business information and using it to develop a case against you. The betrayal was so comprehensive and calculating that I could barely process the emotional implications. Marcus hadn't just decided to leave me for another woman or pursue a different career path. He'd spent months methodically planning to destroy everything I'd worked to build, steal my life's work, and send me to federal prison. What about Sarah? What evidence do you have of her involvement? Sarah has been even more sophisticated in her approach. She's used her position at Fort Hood to access information about your security clearances, your contract performance evaluations, and your relationships with government officials. She's also been conducting what appear to be unauthorized background investigations into your employees and business associates. Sarah's abuse of her military position added federal crimes to an already extensive conspiracy. She'd violated her oath as an officer by using government resources for personal gain, and had potentially compromised classified information in the process. Linda, how long do you think it will take them to realize that I know what they're doing? Probably not long. Marcus will notice if you start acting differently around him, and Sarah will become suspicious if you don't follow through on hiring. James Thompson. We need to move quickly to gather additional evidence before they realize their conspiracy has been exposed. The race against time was about to begin. Marcus and Sarah had spent months planning my destruction, but they'd made one crucial error. They'd underestimated my ability to identify and counter their conspiracy, and they'd failed to account for the possibility that their carefully orchestrated legal manipulation would backfire. The hunters were about to become the hunted. I sat in my car in the parking lot of Linda Martinez's office for 20 minutes, unable to start the engine or process what I'd just learned. 8 months of systematic betrayal by the two people I trusted most in the world. Every conversation with Marcus about my business, every piece of advice from Sarah about military contracting, every moment of intimacy and friendship had been part of an elaborate deception designed to destroy me. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Financial records showing coordination between Marcus and Sarah. Bank accounts proving they'd been planning a competing business. Legal consultation fees demonstrating premeditated fraud allegations. My husband and best friend had spent the better part of a year methodically planning to steal my life's work and send me to federal prison. When I finally drove home to Cedar Park, the house that had represented our shared success and future looked like a monument to lies. Every piece of furniture Marcus and I had chosen together, every photograph of happy moments with Sarah, every symbol of the life I thought we were building, felt contaminated by the knowledge of their betrayal. Marcus was waiting in the kitchen. When I walked through the door, his expression carefully arranged to show appropriate concern about my legal troubles. He'd prepared dinner and opened a bottle of wine, creating an atmosphere of supportive domesticity that now felt like another manipulation. How did your meeting with the attorney go? Did James Thompson think he could help you with the investigation? The casual way he mentioned James Thompson's name confirmed that he knew exactly who I'd met with and why. There was no surprise in his voice, no curiosity about how I'd found such a well-regarded criminal defense attorney so quickly. He was monitoring my responses to the crisis he'd created, gathering intelligence about my defense strategy. The meeting was illuminating, I replied, studying his face for any reaction. I learned some interesting things about how fraud investigations work and who might be involved in filing false allegations. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but I detected a slight tension around his eyes. What kind of things did you learn? James Thompson explained that these kinds of cases usually involve someone with inside knowledge of the target's business operations. Someone who understands the contracts, the clients, and the financial systems well enough to craft convincing allegations. That makes sense. Sarah mentioned something similar when I talked to her this afternoon. The casual mention of his conversation with Sarah was another confirmation of their coordination. They were comparing notes about my reactions, my legal strategy, and my emotional state. I was under surveillance by the people who were supposed to love and protect me. What did Sarah say? Just that military bureaucracy can be really challenging to navigate, especially when someone makes false accusations. She offered to help in any way she could, maybe use her contacts to find out more about where these allegations came from. The irony of Sarah offering to investigate the fraud allegations she'd helped create was almost too much to bear. She was positioning herself as my ally and support system, while simultaneously orchestrating my destruction. That's very generous of her. Sarah's always been loyal to the people she cares about. You know she'd do anything to protect you. The word protect felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Sarah wasn't protecting me. She was systematically dismantling everything I'd built while pretending to offer comfort and support. The depth of her deception was breathtaking in its cruelty. I excused myself to shower, needing space to process the emotional devastation of what I'd discovered. Standing under the hot water, I finally allowed myself to feel the full impact of their betrayal. These weren't strangers or business competitors who'd targeted me for financial gain. These were the people I'd trusted with my deepest vulnerabilities, my professional secrets, and my emotional well-being. Marcus had held me when I cried about leaving the military. He'd celebrated every success of my business and encouraged me through every challenge. He'd been my partner in building a life together, my confidant about my hopes and fears for the future. All of it had been a performance designed to gather information and identify weaknesses he could exploit. Sarah had been my sister in arms, my closest friend through 8 years of military service and 2 years of civilian life. She'd been my maid of honor at my wedding, my advisor on business challenges, my companion through deployments and career transitions. She knew my family, my dreams, my insecurities, and my deepest secrets. Every moment of friendship had apparently been an opportunity to collect intelligence for use against me. The betrayal was so complete and so personal that it felt like losing my identity. If Marcus and Sarah could deceive me so thoroughly for so long, what did that say about my judgment, my intelligence, my ability to protect myself? I was a trained intelligence officer who'd spent years identifying threats and protecting national security, yet I'd been completely blind to a conspiracy being orchestrated by the people closest to me. When I emerged from the shower, I found Marcus reviewing documents on his laptop in our bedroom. The sight of him working at the desk where we'd planned our future together felt like another violation. How many of those planning sessions had actually been intelligence-gathering operations for his conspiracy with Sarah? "Feeling better?" he asked without looking up from his screen. "Not really. This whole situation is more serious than I initially thought." "What do you mean?" "James Thompson thinks someone has been planning this attack on my business for months. Someone with detailed knowledge of my operations and access to confidential information." Marcus closed his laptop and turned to face me, his expression arranged, in a mask of concern that I now recognized as completely artificial. "That's pretty paranoid thinking, isn't it? Why would someone spend months planning to hurt you?" "Because my company is worth millions of dollars, and destroying my reputation would be an effective way to steal it." "You think someone wants to steal Sentinel Security Solutions?" The way he asked the question confirmed that he already knew the answer. He wasn't surprised by the possibility. He was testing how much I'd figured out about his plans. "I think someone wants to eliminate me as competition and take over my client relationships." Marcus was quiet for several moments, and I could see him calculating how to respond. Finally, he said, "Well, if that's true, we'll figure out who's responsible and make sure they face consequences." The casual use of "we" felt like the final insult. Marcus was pretending to be my partner in fighting against a conspiracy he'd created. He was offering to help me identify and punish himself. I lay awake that night next to my husband, knowing that he was my enemy and that everything about our life together was a lie. The man sleeping beside me had spent months planning my imprisonment and the theft of my life's work. Tomorrow, I would have to continue pretending I didn't know what he'd done while gathering evidence to expose his conspiracy. The woman who'd built a successful business from nothing, who'd served her country with distinction, who'd overcome every challenge through intelligence and determination, had been reduced to a victim of the most intimate betrayal imaginable. But I was still a soldier, and soldiers don't surrender. I woke up at 0500 hours, my military training asserting itself in the moment I needed it most. Marcus was still asleep beside me, his breathing steady and peaceful, completely unaware that I'd discovered his conspiracy. Looking at his relaxed face in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt something shift inside me from devastation to cold, calculating fury. These people had made a fundamental error in their assessment of who they were targeting. They'd seen a successful businesswoman and assumed I would crumble under pressure, that I would panic when faced with federal allegations, that I would be easy to manipulate and control. They'd forgotten that before I was an entrepreneur, I was a United States Army intelligence officer trained to identify, analyze, and neutralize threats to national security. Marcus and Sarah had declared war on me, and they were about to learn that they'd chosen the wrong enemy. I slipped out of bed without waking Marcus and went to my home office, where I began developing an operational plan to expose their conspiracy and protect myself from their fraud allegations. My military training had taught me that successful operations required clear objectives, detailed intelligence, and coordinated action across multiple fronts. My primary objective was to gather irrefutable evidence of Marcus and Sarah's conspiracy before they realized I'd discovered their plan. Secondary objectives included protecting Sentinel Security Solutions from their false allegations and ensuring they faced criminal prosecution for their actions. The intelligence picture was already substantial thanks to Linda Martinez's investigation, but I needed additional evidence that would be admissible in court and convincing to federal prosecutors. I also needed to document their ongoing conspiracy activities to prove the scope and duration of their criminal enterprise. My first tactical decision was to act as if nothing had changed while secretly gathering evidence and building my case. Marcus and Sarah expected me to be confused, desperate, and dependent on their guidance. I would let them maintain that illusion while systematically exposing their deception. I called Linda Martinez at 6:30 in the morning, knowing that a former military investigator would appreciate early hours and urgent priorities. "Victoria, I've been hoping you'd call. I've uncovered additional evidence overnight that changes our timeline significantly." "What did you find?" "Marcus and Sarah have accelerated their plans. Based on communications I've intercepted, they're planning to file additional fraud allegations against you within the next 48 hours. They believe you're vulnerable and confused, and they want to overwhelm you with multiple federal investigations before you can mount an effective defense." The news that they were escalating their attack confirmed my decision to go on the offensive immediately. If I waited for them to continue implementing their plan, I might find myself facing criminal charges from multiple agencies while they positioned themselves to acquire my company. "Linda, I need you to help me set up surveillance and evidence gathering operations. If they're planning additional attacks, I want to document every aspect of their conspiracy." I was hoping you'd say that. I've already identified several opportunities to gather direct evidence of their coordination and planning. Linda outlined a comprehensive surveillance plan that would monitor Marcus and Sarah's communications, document their meetings, and record their conversations about the conspiracy. The operation would require sophisticated technical equipment and careful coordination to avoid detection, but it would provide the kind of evidence that could result in federal conspiracy charges. "How long will this take?" "If we move quickly, we can have surveillance in place within 12 hours. The key is acting before they become suspicious of your behavior or realize that their legal manipulation has been exposed." I spent the next hour working with Linda to finalize operational details, while Marcus slept peacefully in our bedroom, completely unaware that he was about to become the target of the kind of investigation he'd been conducting against me. When Marcus woke up at 7:30, I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast and coffee, playing the role of the stressed and vulnerable wife who needed his support during a legal crisis. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine concern, but which I now recognized as intelligence gathering. "Terrible. I barely slept thinking about everything James Thompson told me yesterday." "What specifically has you worried?" "The possibility that someone close to me might be involved in these allegations." The idea that someone I trust has been working against me is almost worse than the legal problems themselves. Marcus's expression remained sympathetic, but I caught a brief flicker of something that might have been satisfaction. He was pleased that I was considering the possibility of betrayal by someone close to me, probably because it would make me more dependent on his guidance and support. That does sound paranoid, Vic. Who do you think would want to hurt you? I don't know. Maybe a competitor or a disgruntled employee or someone who thinks they can profit from destroying my reputation. Well, whoever it is, we'll figure it out together. You don't have to face this alone. The reassurance felt like poison given what I now knew about his true intentions. Marcus was positioning himself as my protector while actively orchestrating my destruction. My phone rang at 8:15 with a call from Sarah Chen. I answered on speakerphone so Marcus could hear the conversation, maintaining the illusion that I trusted both of them completely. Victoria, I've been thinking about your situation all night, and I have some ideas about how to move forward. I could really use some advice. This whole thing feels overwhelming. I think your first priority should be hiring the best possible criminal defense attorney, someone with specific experience in federal fraud cases. James Thompson seems qualified. Should I retain him? Absolutely. But I also think you should consider firing Rebecca Morrison. Corporate compliance law is very different from criminal defense, and you don't want to waste time with an attorney who doesn't understand federal investigations. Sarah's eagerness to have me fire Rebecca Morrison confirmed that she didn't know about Rebecca's marriage to James Thompson. The conspiracy relied on their ability to control my legal representation, and they believed they could manipulate me into hiring James while dismissing Rebecca. That makes sense. I'll call James Thompson this morning and discuss retaining his services. Good. I also think we should meet later today to discuss some additional strategies for protecting your business during the investigation. What kind of strategies? Ways to minimize the damage to your client relationships and maybe transfer some of your most valuable contracts to trusted partners who could manage them during the crisis. The suggestion that I transfer contracts to trusted partners was their plan to steal my most valuable business relationships. Sarah was proposing that I voluntarily give away the assets they were trying to acquire through their conspiracy. I'll think about it. Can we meet this evening? Perfect. Marcus, you should join us. This affects both of you, and we'll need to coordinate our efforts to protect Victoria's interests. After ending the call, Marcus turned to me with an expression of supportive determination. Sarah's right. We need to be strategic about protecting your business while you fight these allegations. The coordination between Marcus and Sarah was seamless, suggesting they'd rehearsed this conversation or discussed their approach in advance. They were implementing a plan to control my decision-making while positioning themselves to acquire my business assets, but they'd made a crucial miscalculation. They assumed I would remain passive and dependent while they orchestrated my downfall. Instead, I was about to launch a counteroffensive that would expose their conspiracy and send them to federal prison. The war they'd started was about to turn against them in ways they couldn't imagine. The meeting that evening was scheduled for 7 o'clock at our house in Cedar Park. By 6:30, Linda Martinez's surveillance team had positioned themselves with audio and video recording equipment that would capture everything Marcus and Sarah said about their conspiracy. I wore a concealed recording device provided by Linda, and my home office had been equipped with hidden cameras that would document any incriminating documents or communications they might share. Rebecca Morrison was standing by with federal prosecutors, who'd agreed to review the evidence we gathered. If Marcus and Sarah incriminated themselves as thoroughly as we expected, arrest warrants could be issued within hours of the meeting's conclusion. When Sarah arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, she embraced me with what appeared to be genuine warmth and concern. The performance was so convincing that I might have believed it myself if I hadn't seen the evidence of her systematic betrayal. She'd brought a briefcase full of documents that she claimed would help me navigate the fraud investigation. Victoria, I've been working all day on strategies to protect your business during this crisis. she said, settling into our living room with Marcus beside her. "I think I've identified some options that could minimize the damage and maybe even turn this situation to your advantage." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Sarah has some really innovative ideas about how to restructure your contracts and client relationships." The coordination between them was seamless, confirming that they'd rehearsed. This presentation, they were about to propose that I voluntarily transfer my most valuable business assets to them, while believing I was protecting myself from federal prosecution. "What kind of restructuring are you thinking about?" I asked. Sarah opened her briefcase and spread several documents across our coffee table. "The key is to create legal separation between you personally and your most valuable contracts. If federal investigators freeze your business assets, you could lose everything. But if those contracts are managed by trusted partners, they'll be protected from government seizure." "What would that look like practically?" "Marcus and I have been discussing the possibility of forming a joint venture that could take over your most sensitive defense contracts," Sarah continued. "Thompson Security Consulting would handle the business operations, while I would provide military liaison services through my contacts at Fort Hood." The boldness of their proposal was breathtaking. They were asking me to voluntarily hand over my business to the joint venture they'd been secretly planning for months. They'd crafted the fraud allegations specifically to create the crisis that would justify this asset transfer. How would the financial arrangements work? Marcus leaned forward with enthusiasm. "You'd retain majority ownership of the transferred contracts, but Sarah and I would manage day-to-day operations and client relationships. This protects you from personal liability while ensuring your business continues generating revenue during the investigation." "What percentage of ownership would you and Sarah have?" "We were thinking a three-way partnership, 33% each, with shared decision-making authority." The proposal was exactly what Linda Martinez had predicted. Marcus and Sarah wanted me to voluntarily give them control of my business while retaining just enough ownership to make the arrangement appear legitimate. Once they had operational control, they could gradually squeeze me out completely. "This sounds like a significant change to consider during a crisis," I said carefully. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand with apparent sincerity. "Victoria, I know this is overwhelming, but you have to trust us. Marcus and I only want to protect you and your business. We've been friends for too long to let some bureaucratic investigation destroy everything you've built." The word trust, coming from someone who'd been systematically betraying me for 8 months, was almost too much to bear. Sarah was asking me to trust her while implementing a plan to steal my life's work. "Can I see the partnership documents you've prepared?" Marcus pulled a folder from Sarah's briefcase and handed me a detailed legal agreement. The document had obviously been prepared by professional attorneys and contained sophisticated language about asset protection, liability limitation, and operational authority. They'd invested significant time and money in developing this scheme. As I reviewed the partnership agreement, I noticed several clauses that would give Marcus and Sarah immediate control over my client relationships, my business bank accounts, and my government contracts. The arrangement was designed to look protective while actually transferring complete operational authority to them. "This is pretty comprehensive," I said, looking up from the documents. "How long have you been working on this partnership structure?" Marcus and Sarah exchanged a quick glance before Marcus responded. "We started discussing it after your legal troubles began. Sarah has expertise in military contracting, and I understand financial management. It seemed natural to combine our skills to help you through this crisis." The lie was delivered with perfect sincerity, but I knew they'd been planning this partnership for months before the fraud allegations were filed. The legal documents were too sophisticated to have been prepared in the few days since Colonel Hayes's phone call. "I need to ask you both something directly," I said, setting down the partnership agreement. "Do either of you know who filed the fraud allegations against me?" Both of them shook their heads with expressions of concern and puzzlement. Sarah spoke first. "I've been trying to use my contacts to find out, but fraud investigations are usually Confidential until they reach the prosecution stage. Marcus nodded in agreement. I've been thinking about who might have access to your business information and motivation to cause problems, but I can't identify any obvious suspects. Their ability to lie directly to my face while expressing sympathy for my situation demonstrated the depth of their deception. They weren't just stealing from me, they were psychologically manipulating me while pretending to offer comfort and support. Well, whoever it is knows my business operations intimately, I said. The allegations are too specific and detailed to come from an outsider. That's what makes this so scary, Sarah replied. Someone you trust has been working against you for months, maybe longer. The irony of Sarah warning me about someone I trusted working against me was almost too much to bear. She was describing her own actions while positioning herself as my protector. I think we should implement this partnership arrangement immediately, Marcus said. Every day we delay gives the federal investigators more time to freeze your assets or damage your client relationships. How quickly could we finalize the legal arrangements? I've already spoken with James Thompson about preparing the necessary documents, Sarah said. He could have everything ready for signature within 24 hours. The mention of James Thompson completed the picture of their conspiracy. They'd coordinated with him to prepare partnership documents that would transfer my business assets to them under the guise of protecting me from federal prosecution. That's very efficient planning, I said, standing up from the couch. I'm impressed by how quickly you've been able to develop such a comprehensive solution to my problems. Something in my tone must have alerted them because both Marcus and Sarah looked at me with expressions of confusion and concern. Victoria, is everything okay? Marcus asked. Everything is perfect, I replied, moving toward the front door. In fact, everything is about to become much clearer for all of us. I opened the door to reveal Linda Martinez and 2 federal agents standing on our front porch with arrest warrants in their hands. The game was over. The arrest of Marcus and Sarah unfolded with the swift efficiency of a well-planned military operation. Federal agents read them their rights, while Linda Martinez's surveillance team provided real-time evidence of their conspiracy. The partnership documents they'd brought to steal my business became exhibits in a federal fraud case that would send them to prison for decades. Marcus's face when he realized I'd orchestrated their capture was a mixture of shock, rage, and something that looked almost like admiration. Even as handcuffs were placed on his wrists, he seemed impressed by the sophistication of the counterintelligence operation I'd conducted against him. You played us perfectly, he said as agents led him toward their vehicle. I underestimated you. Sarah's reaction was pure fury. She screamed accusations about entrapment and betrayal, apparently unable to grasp the irony of complaining about being deceived by someone she'd been systematically betraying for 8 months. Victoria, how could you do this to me? I've been your friend for over a decade. The question revealed everything about Sarah's twisted psychology. She genuinely believed that our friendship gave her the right to steal my business and destroy my life, and she was outraged that I'd fought back against her conspiracy. Within 48 hours, federal prosecutors had filed charges against Marcus, Sarah, and James Thompson for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and abuse of military authority. The evidence was overwhelming, and all 3 defendants agreed to plea negotiations rather than face trial. The investigation also revealed that their conspiracy had extended beyond targeting me. Marcus had been using similar schemes to defraud elderly clients of his financial advisory business, while Sarah had been selling classified military procurement information to unauthorized private contractors. Their partnership hadn't just been about stealing my company, it had been a criminal enterprise that victimized multiple people. The personal transformation I experienced during those weeks of investigation and prosecution was more profound than anything I'd undergone during my military service or business career. I'd discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and learned that I was capable of strategic thinking and decisive action under the most emotionally devastating circumstances. The Betrayal by Marcus and Sarah had initially felt like evidence of my poor judgment and naive trust. But prosecuting their conspiracy taught me that their deception had been sophisticated enough to fool anyone. They'd spent months crafting their manipulation, and my ability to identify and counter their scheme demonstrated professional competence, not personal weakness. Rebecca Morrison helped me understand the legal implications of what I'd survived. Victoria, what you accomplished was remarkable. You identified a complex conspiracy, gathered evidence that resulted in federal convictions, and protected yourself and your business from people who were trying to destroy you. The criminal cases against Marcus and Sarah provided closure, but the real transformation came from recognizing that I'd emerged from their betrayal stronger and more confident than I'd been before their attack. They'd intended to break me, but instead they'd revealed capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. 6 months after their arrest, I made a decision that surprised everyone who knew me. Instead of simply rebuilding Sentinel Security Solutions, expanded our mission to include helping other veterans who'd been victimized by financial fraud and business betrayal. The new division of my company provided investigative services, legal support, and emotional counseling for military families who'd been targeted by schemes similar to what I'd experienced. We worked with federal law enforcement agencies to identify patterns of veteran victimization and developed educational programs to help service members protect themselves from financial predators. You've turned your personal trauma into a mission to protect other people, Linda Martinez observed during one of our consulting meetings. That's not just business expansion, that's purpose-driven transformation. The work felt like a natural extension of my military service. Instead of protecting classified communications from foreign enemies, I was protecting fellow veterans from domestic criminals who exploited their trust and sacrificed for personal gain. Marcus and Sarah had intended their conspiracy to be the end of my story. Instead, it became the beginning of a new chapter focused on service, protection, and justice for people who'd given everything to defend our country. 3 years after Marcus and Sarah's conviction, I stood before a congressional committee presenting testimony about financial crimes targeting military families. The hearing room was packed with veteran advocates, law enforcement officials, and family members of fraud victims who'd found their voices through programs I'd helped establish. Honorable members of Congress, when criminals target veterans and their families, they're not just stealing money. They're exploiting the trust and sacrifice that define military service. They're weaponizing the very loyalty and honor that make our service members effective defenders of democracy. The legislation we were advocating for would create enhanced penalties for financial crimes against veterans, establish specialized prosecution units within federal agencies, and fund support services for military families recovering from fraud victimization. It was comprehensive reform that addressed the systemic vulnerabilities Marcus and Sarah had exploited. Sentinel Security Solutions had grown beyond anything I'd originally envisioned. Our Veteran Protection Division now employed 43 former military investigators, attorneys, and counselors who specialized in helping service members fight back against financial predators. We'd recovered over $12 million in stolen assets and helped send 37 criminals to federal prison. The most rewarding aspect of our work wasn't the financial recoveries or criminal convictions, though those were important. It was watching veterans rediscover their strength and confidence after being victimized by people they'd trusted. Every client who fought back against fraud, every family that rebuilt after betrayal, every service member who learned to trust their instincts again, represented a victory against the forces that had tried to destroy me. Detective Linda Martinez had become our chief investigator, bringing her expertise in corporate fraud to hundreds of cases involving veteran victimization. Her ability to identify patterns of criminal behavior had helped us expose several organized fraud rings that specifically targeted military families. Victoria, what you've built here goes far beyond business success, Linda said during our quarterly review meeting. You've created a movement that's changing how this country protects the people who protect us. Rebecca Morrison continued serving as our legal counsel, and her marriage to James Thompson had provided unexpected insights into the psychology of lawyers who exploit client vulnerabilities. James had received a 15-year federal sentence for his role in the conspiracy, but his cooperation with investigators had helped expose other attorneys who were manipulating vulnerable clients. The educational programs we'd developed were now used by military bases throughout the country to train service members about financial fraud prevention. Young soldiers learned to recognize the warning signs Marcus and Sarah had displayed, and experienced veterans shared their stories to help others avoid similar betrayals. One of our most successful initiatives was the peer support network that connected fraud survivors with newly victimized families. Veterans who'd successfully fought back against financial predators provided guidance, encouragement, and practical advice to those just beginning their recovery journey. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, whose retirement savings had been stolen by a scheme similar to Marcus and Sarah's conspiracy, became one of our most effective peer counselors. "When someone steals your money, they steal your future," she explained to new clients. "But when you fight back and win, you get more than money back. You get your power back." The ripple effects of our work extended beyond individual cases. Federal agencies had adopted investigation techniques we'd developed, and other organizations had replicated our support services in communities across the country. The conspiracy that was meant to destroy me had inadvertently created a national infrastructure for protecting veterans from financial exploitation. Marcus and Sarah had believed they were targeting an isolated businesswoman who would crumble under pressure. Instead, they'd attacked someone whose military training, professional skills, and sense of justice would transform their betrayal into a force for protecting thousands of other potential victims. Their conspiracy had failed spectacularly, but its legacy lived on in every veteran we helped, every criminal we exposed, and every family we empowered to fight back against those who would exploit their service and sacrifice. The war they'd started had become a victory for everyone they'd underestimated. 5 years after that devastating phone call from Colonel Hayes, I found myself standing in the same home office where I'd first learned about the fraud allegations that had threatened to destroy my life. The room looked completely different now, transformed from a simple workspace into a command center for protecting veterans nationwide. The walls were covered with thank you letters from military families we'd helped, photographs of recovered, stolen assets being returned to their rightful owners, and news articles about legislation that had strengthened protections for service members against financial predators. The desk where I'd once sat in confused terror now held awards recognizing our organization's impact on veteran advocacy and fraud prevention. Rebecca Morrison sat across from me, reviewing the final settlement documents from a major case we'd just concluded. An investment firm that had been systematically defrauding retired military officers had agreed to pay $47 million in restitution and faced criminal charges that would likely result in decades of prison time for its executives. "Victoria, do you ever think about how different your life would be if Marcus and Sarah had never targeted you?" Rebecca asked, setting down the legal documents. The question made me pause and consider the alternate timeline where their conspiracy had never existed. I would probably still be running a successful but smaller cybersecurity firm, focused primarily on corporate clients and government contracts. My personal life might have followed a conventional path with Marcus, built on the foundation of lies and manipulation I'd mistaken for love and partnership. I think I would have been successful but not fulfilled, I replied after considering her question carefully. The betrayal forced me to discover strengths and purposes I never would have found otherwise. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus and Sarah's attempt to destroy my life had actually revealed my true calling. Their conspiracy had been designed to eliminate me as competition in the cybersecurity industry, but it had transformed me into something they'd never anticipated. A nationally recognized advocate for veteran protection with resources and influence far beyond anything I'd possessed as a simple business owner. Earlier that morning, I'd received a letter from the federal prison where Marcus was serving his sentence. It was his first communication since his conviction 5 years earlier, and its contents had surprised me with their apparent sincerity and self-awareness. Victoria, I know I have no right to contact you, and I don't expect forgiveness for what I did to you. But I needed you to know that watching the work you've built from my betrayal has taught me more about honor and service than I learned in my entire previous life. You turned my attempt to destroy you into something that protects thousands of people. That's the kind of person I should have tried to become instead of the criminal I chose to be. The letter continued with details about his participation in prison programs focused on financial ethics and victim impact awareness. He'd apparently become a mentor for other white-collar criminals, helping them understand the true cost of their crimes and the long-term consequences of betraying trust for financial gain. Reading Marcus's letter in the office where I'd first discovered his conspiracy felt like closing a circle that had defined the most transformative period of my life. The man who'd tried to steal my future had inadvertently given me a purpose more meaningful than anything I'd previously imagined. Sarah Chen had been released from federal prison 6 months earlier, after serving her full sentence. Unlike Marcus, she'd never acknowledged responsibility for her actions or expressed remorse for the harm she'd caused. According to reports from Linda Martinez's ongoing monitoring, Sarah was working at a civilian logistics company in another state, apparently rebuilding her life without any recognition of the damage she'd inflicted. The contrast between Marcus's apparent transformation and Sarah's continued denial highlighted something I'd learned about people who betray trust. Some criminals eventually develop genuine remorse and work to understand the impact of their actions. Others remain focused on their own victimhood and never accept responsibility for the choices that led to their downfall. My phone buzzed with a text message from Colonel Hayes, now retired from active duty and serving as an advisor to our veteran protection programs. She was calling to congratulate me on the congressional testimony that had helped secure passage of the Military Family Financial Protection Act, legislation that would create new federal resources for investigating and prosecuting crimes against service members. Victoria, when I made that phone call 5 years ago to warn you about fraud allegations, I never imagined it would lead to the most significant veteran protection legislation in decades. Sometimes the worst attacks on good people create opportunities for extraordinary positive change. Standing in that office, surrounded by evidence of the movement that had grown from my personal catastrophe, I finally understood the complete transformation that Marcus and Sarah's betrayal had triggered. They'd intended to reduce me to a powerless victim, but they'd actually revealed capabilities I'd never known I possessed and connected me to a mission larger than anything I'd previously pursued. The phone call that had shattered my assumptions about trust and security had ultimately led me to discover my true purpose in life. If someone had told me 6 years ago that my husband and best friend would conspire to frame me for federal crimes, I would have considered them paranoid and delusional. If they'd told me that surviving their betrayal would become the most transformative experience of my life, I would have questioned their understanding of trauma and loss. But here I am, speaking to you from a position of strength I never knew I possessed, having built something meaningful from the ashes of what I thought was my destroyed life. The first lesson I learned is that trust should never be absolute, even with the people closest to you. This doesn't mean living in suspicion or paranoia, but it means paying attention to patterns of behavior that don't align with someone's stated intentions. When Marcus began asking detailed questions about my most profitable contracts, while simultaneously becoming secretive about his own activities, those were warning signs I should have investigated rather than dismissed. Military training teaches you to trust your instincts, but civilian life often encourages us to doubt ourselves in favor of maintaining relationships and avoiding conflict. When something feels wrong, investigate that feeling rather than suppressing it. Your subconscious mind often processes information that your conscious mind hasn't fully recognized yet. The second crucial insight is that betrayal, while devastating, can reveal strengths you never knew you had. When Marcus and Sarah's conspiracy, forced me to choose between collapsing under pressure or fighting back with everything I possessed. I discovered capabilities that 8 years of military service hadn't revealed. The crisis stripped away all the comfortable assumptions about my life and forced me to rely on skills and determination I'd never been required to use fully. If you find yourself facing betrayal by people you trusted, remember that their actions reflect their character, not yours. Sophisticated manipulation isn't evidence of your naivety, it's evidence of their calculated cruelty. Don't let their deception make you doubt your intelligence or judgment. Instead, use their betrayal as motivation to become stronger and more capable than they ever imagined possible. The third lesson involves the importance of building systems rather than just recovering from individual attacks. When I first discovered Marcus and Sarah's conspiracy, my goal was simply protecting myself and my business from their fraud allegations. But as I learned more about how they'd targeted me, I realized they represented a much larger problem affecting thousands of veterans and military families. Individual victories against fraud are important, but systemic change protects future victims who might not have the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. Every person who's been betrayed has an opportunity to transform their experience into protection for others facing similar challenges. The most powerful advice I can give is this: when someone tries to destroy you, don't just survive their attack. Use their betrayal as fuel to become someone they never could have defeated. Marcus and Sarah thought they were targeting a vulnerable business owner who would crumble under federal investigation. Instead, they attacked a trained intelligence officer whose response would expose their conspiracy, send them to prison, and create national infrastructure for protecting other veterans. Your betrayers see you as you were when they planned their attack. They don't account for who you'll become. When forced to fight for everything you value, that transformation is your greatest weapon against people who underestimate your capacity for growth and resistance. If you're currently facing betrayal, remember that the people who hurt you are counting on your despair to prevent effective resistance. They want you to feel isolated, confused, and dependent on their guidance. Don't give them that power. Build a team of professionals who can help you identify the scope of what you're facing and develop strategies for fighting back. Finally, understand that surviving betrayal isn't just about personal recovery. It's about becoming living proof that predators who target good people can face consequences for their actions. Every person who fights back successfully makes it more difficult for similar crimes to succeed in the future. The conspiracy that was meant to destroy me ultimately revealed that I was far stronger than my enemies, my allies, or even I had realized. Your strength is waiting to be discovered in your darkest moments. Yesterday, I received a call that brought this story full circle in the most unexpected way. A young Army captain named Jennifer Rodriguez, no relation, despite the shared name, contacted our Veteran Protection Hotline. She'd discovered that her husband and business partner had been systematically stealing from the cybersecurity firm she'd built after leaving active duty. "Ma'am, I found your story online, and I realized I'm living through the exact same nightmare you survived," she said, her voice carrying the same confusion and devastation I'd felt during that first phone call from Colonel Hayes. As I listened to Jennifer describe her situation, I realized that Marcus and Sarah's legacy wasn't just the legislation we'd passed or the criminals we'd exposed. Their betrayal had created a blueprint for survival that was now protecting people they'd never met, in circumstances they could never have imagined. "Jennifer, you're not alone in this fight," I told her, "and you're going to discover strengths you never knew you had." 6 years ago, a phone call from Colonel Hayes changed my life forever. Today, I was the one making the call that would help another veteran transform betrayal into strength, victimization into advocacy, and personal trauma into protection for others. The cycle continues, but now it works in favor of the good people instead of the predators who target them. That's the real victory Marcus and Sarah never saw coming. If stories like this inspire you to never give up, no matter how dark things seem, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Every subscription helps us reach more people who need to hear that they're stronger than they know, and that even the worst betrayals can become the foundation for extraordinary positive change.